Camden Town. Camden Town has existed only since the 1790s. Charles Pratt, Earl of Camden, is credited with the establishment of Camden Town. Pratt's role in shaping the area is marked by a street bearing his name in the heart of modern Camden Town. Camden Town's expansion as a major centre came with the opening of the Regent's Canal to traffic in 1820, which linked the Grand Junction Canal at Paddington with the River Thames at Limehouse. This enabled goods to be moved by barge more easily from the industrial Midlands to the London docks. Railway and canal construction brought the first Irish settlers to Camden. This process was accelerated after 1840 by terrible famine in Ireland. By the end of the 19th century, soot and grime from the major railway terminals to the south covered a Camden High Street busy with shops, trams and horse-drawn buses. During the Second World War, the railway termini were an important target and the area was badly damaged by bombing. Many streets were changed when new housing developments and schemes were introduced in the 1960s. The conversion of Camden Lock's wharves and warehouses on the Regent's Canal to craft markets in the 1970s ensured Camden Town's future as one of London's top tourist attractions.
Never know how much I love you. Never know how much I care. When you put your arms around me, I get a fever that's so hard to bear. Fever.
Chalk Farm, as the name suggests, started out as a farmhouse, which later became a tavern in the middle of meadows. The original Chalk Farm Tavern still survives as a restaurant. Kentish Town. Kentish Town started life as Kentiston, first recorded in 1208 during King John's reign. By the mid-15th century, it had grown into a major hamlet, but today its rural character has disappeared, as too has the River Fleet, which once ran through the area. Kentish Town was a prime site for development in the early 19th century, such as the Kentish Town Road, which was a major route from London northwards. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, this area became for many years the home of many famous piano and organ manufacturers, and was described as that healthful suburb dear to the heart of the piano maker. After the Second World War, many of the original Victorian dwellings gave way to more recent housing projects. Gospel Oak. The name derives from an oak tree under which parishioners gathered to hear an annual gospel reading when the area was still rural. The people living here 300 years ago made their living supplying milk to Londoners, and this lasted up to the latter part of the 18th century, when it gave way to producing fodder for working horses. A rural area, once home to watercress beds, Gospel Oak initially developed as a residential location during the mid-19th century. Plans were drawn up for elegant streets radiating from Lismore Circus, but after 2 railway lines were extended across the area, the first buildings were 2- and 3-storey cottages for navvies and quarrelsome shoemakers. Belsize Park. The word Belsize, from the French meaning well-seated, was a sub-manor of Hampstead, and Belsize House, a renowned place of entertainment, was demolished in 1853. The area known as Belsize Park was built on the estate, leaving only its main drive as Belsize Avenue. In World War II, one of the large underground air raid shelters was built there and can be seen near the tube station at Downside Crescent. The area on Haverstock Hill, north of Belsize Park Underground Station, was heavily bombed. When the area was rebuilt, the opportunity was taken to widen the pavement and rebuild further back from the road. Swiss Cottage was named after a pub on Finchley Road, sited next to a toll gate and built in 1840 in the style of a Swiss mountain chalet. Little remains today of Kilburn Priory, apart from some street names. The Priory was a 12th century religious foundation that offered shelter and food for travellers until the monasteries were dissolved by Henry VIII. Highgate. Highgate had belonged in the Middle Ages to the Bishop of London. Its name almost certainly comes from one of its gates. A prominent part of the village was, and still is, Highgate Cemetery, which was opened in 1839. The Victorian attitude to death and its presentation led to the creation of a wealth of Gothic tombs and buildings. Highgate Cemetery has become a resting place for many famous people, including Karl Marx, George Eliot and Michael Faraday. And Highgate Old Cemetery is also well known for its so-called occult past, being the site of the alleged Highgate vampire. Hampstead began as a Saxon village. Its name comes from the Saxon words ham-stida, which meant home farm. For centuries it was just a quiet village. However, in the late 17th century, Hampstead began to develop as wealthy people fled the plague of 1665 and the fire of 1666. In the 18th century, Hampstead became a spa town after a certain Dr. Gibbons discovered the water from the spring had healing properties. In the 18th and 19th centuries, it was considered to be a country retreat away from the bustle and smoke of London, with fresh air and water, and, as the highest point in London, a variety of attractive views. Hampstead is renowned for the famous writers who have lived there. Keats wrote the poem Ode to a Nightingale in the garden of his house, and now it's called Keats' House. D.H. Lawrence lived in the Vale of Health. The famous artist John Constable lived at 40 Well Walk and made several paintings with Hampstead and Hampstead Heath scenes. In the 18th century, many grand houses were built in Hampstead, like Burgh House, which is now a museum. The magnificent Kenwood House was first built in the 17th century, then rebuilt in the 18th for the first Earl of Mansfield on the grounds of Hampstead Heath, which in the 19th century became the playground for Londoners. That was the short history